inside the royal bedchamber at St. James's Palace. In the year 1558, the name was Mary Tudor, Queen of England, and she was dying like no queen ever should. Her body had become a tomb of its own making. The stench of decay seeped through every crack in the stone. Her belly, bloated and rigid, stretched her skin to a near-translucent sheen. Beneath it, infection pulsed and thick, sour and alive. Her legs oozed. Her breath wheezed through cracked lips stained with blood. Her eyes, once sharp and sovereign, now stared blankly at the ceiling beams wide, glazed, unblinking. She hadn't moved in hours, but something in the room had. Sheets soaked in a dark fluid. Not sweat, not water. Something heavier. Something wrong. No one spoke of the blackened patches spreading down her spine, of the way her fingers curled like claws around the crucifix clutched to her chest. No one admitted the truth. She reeked of the grave before she'd even crossed into it. The priests murmured, mass after mass. The physicians bled her until she fainted. Still, she screamed. Not words, just sound. Raw, guttural, maddening. A sound that clawed at the mind and made men stumble back in terror. Behind closed doors, whispers multiplied. Of poison in the chalice, of plots hatched in candlelight, of a queen marked not by fate, but by vengeance. Had her enemies come for her from within? Had God turned his face, or was something far more ancient feeding on her from the inside? Candles flickered even without wind. Mirrors refused to hold her reflection. Rats fled the room. Dogs howled when passing her door. And yet, she lingered, day after day, decomposing in power, trapped in flesh, drowning in faith, until the palace itself seemed to breathe with her decay. You've heard of Bloody Mary, but you haven't heard this. Not the part they buried, not the part they burned, not the part that still waits in the dark. The castle air was always cold, not just from stone, but from silence. It hummed in the walls, an emptiness that echoed back everything she was no longer allowed to say. Her name was Mary Tudor, and at 11 years old, she was no longer anyone's princess. They stripped the title from her lips like it was dirt. The Lady Mary, they said now, a bastard. The daughter of a marriage that the king had declared null and cursed. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was locked away. Her father had remarried. And Mary, the bright child once paraded through courts in velvet and pearls, had become something less than shadow. She lived in corners, listened behind doors, spoke only when spoken to. They made her serve her half-sister, Elizabeth Anne Boleyn's child, the child of the woman who had destroyed her world. Mary poured her water, curtsied, smiled through clenched teeth. Behind that smile, something hardened, cold, sharp, quiet. She bled irregularly. Her hands trembled when she wrote. Her head ached like nails tapping from the inside. They called it nerves. They called it womanhood. But Mary knew. It was the weight of humiliation sinking into her bones. They wouldn't let her see her mother. She begged, pleaded in letters, prayed. Nothing. Then, one day, a man came to her room. He didn't kneel, didn't smile. "Your mother is dead," he said. No funeral, no mourning veil, no procession. Her mother had been buried like a servant, in a far-off monastery, with no royal seal, no choir, no crown, not even a final kiss goodbye. Mary did not cry. She stood perfectly still for hours, her face blank, her fingers twitching slightly at her sides. The candlelight trembled more than she did. Somewhere inside her, something cracked, not loudly, but permanently. After that, her voice changed. Low, measured, controlled. She stopped trusting the walls, stopped trusting the people inside them. Her faith, though, deepened, no twisted. Where once she had prayed for comfort, now she prayed for endurance, for revenge, for order, for a world that made sense again, where queens were queens, and bloodlines could not be rewritten by lust and politics. When Anne Boleyn was arrested and dragged to the Tower, Mary did not smile. When the axe fell, clean and final, she did not rejoice. She simply knelt and whispered a name. Not Anne's, not Elizabeth's, her own, because she knew it wasn't over. Henry VIII sent word after that. Wanted peace. He asked her to sign the act of supremacy to call him head of the church, to deny her mother's crown, her own legitimacy, to declare herself a mistake. Mary signed, with a hand that bled from how tightly she gripped the quill. She was welcomed back to court, given dresses, jewels, praise. But the girl who returned was not the girl they remembered. She no longer laughed. She watched, measured, waited. She spoke sweetly, but her eyes saw too much. Every bow felt hollow. Every feast tasted of ash. She had learned the truth, that power did not belong to the rightful. It belonged to the ruthless. And Mary Tudor, forgotten, beaten, broken, was learning to become one of them. Because one day, her crown would not be taken. It would be burned into her skull. She had spent her youth kneeling before altars, before fate, before men who called themselves kings. Now, Mary Tudor sat on the throne of England. The child once cast aside had returned not in vengeance, but in velvet. Her hands, once slapped away from royal tables, now rested on the arms of monarchy itself. But victory brought no warmth. The palace echoed with forced prayers and cautious footsteps. Her council bowed. But too quickly. The people cheered, but with muffled voices. She could feel it, the uncertainty, the quiet dread that trailed behind her like smoke. She was 37, crowned, alone. There was no husband, no heir. The throne trembled beneath that absence. So she looked to Spain, to Philip, son of Charles V, Catholic, imperial, obedient to Rome, a match forged in strategy. But to Mary, it was something deeper in her letters. She called him my comfort in her prayers. She asked that he be her reward after decades of isolation and humiliation. She longed for something soft, something stable, something hers. He arrived under gray skies and Spanish silence. He bowed, but stiffly, kissed her hand, not her mouth, spoke through interpreters, never once looked her fully in the eyes. The wedding was magnificent. Trumpets, incense, Latin chants that echoed off cathedral walls. But the wedding night was a ritual without intimacy. She waited in bed, perfumed, pale, eyes wide open in the candlelight. When the door creaked open, she sat up, breath caught. Philip entered, undressed methodically, laid beside her. He did not touch her, and by morning, he was gone again, attending council, reviewing maps, speaking Spanish to men who did not bow to her. Still, she believed. Weeks later, her body began to change. Her gowns tightened, her stomach swelled. She rose in the mornings with nausea, laid down at night with her hands folded over her belly. She whispered names into the dark. She smiled for the first time in months. The court rejoiced. The bells rang. Orders were given to prepare for the birth of a prince. Mary ordered special masses for the child's soul. She requested cribs carved from olive wood. She kissed the silver crucifix daily and murmured, "He's coming. I feel him." But weeks passed, then months, and the child remained still. Her stomach ached, her back throbbed. She stopped sleeping. Her skin grew yellow. Her ladies avoided her gaze. The whispers began too quiet for her ears, but not for her bones. Phantom pregnancy, tumor, punishment. Philip left for war. No letter, no farewell, just a silence more painful than truth. Still, she waited. Still, she prayed. Still, she bled alone, in a room heavy with incense and dread. And then, impossibly, it happened again. Her belly swelled, her breasts ached, hope clawed its way back into her chest. But this time, no one celebrated. No bells, no court proclamations, just servants who moved like ghosts, priests who avoided her name in homilies, and a husband who never returned. Mary felt it, her body betraying her again, this time with less mercy. She stopped attending court, draped herself in black, refused to eat, refused to speak. She spent hours in the chapel, kneeling until her knees bled, whispering to saints who had long since turned away. She began to fear the mirrors. They no longer showed a queen, only a woman coming undone. One night, she collapsed during prayer. They carried her to bed. She awoke screaming. She said she saw her mother standing in the fire. She said she heard angels. She said the child would come if only England would suffer more. When her belly finally deflated, she said nothing. She simply stood, trembling, and ordered her tapestries replaced with scenes of martyrdom. Saints burning, flesh searing, eyes lifted skyward. She could not give England a child, so she would give it purity, not from the womb, from the flame. And what she could not create, she would cleanse, one soul at a time. It began with a list. Names, men and women. Some poor, some titled, some who had preached, some who had only listened. All had doubted Rome. The list was placed on her desk, parchment creased from trembling hands. Mary read in silence, her fingers tracing each line. No expression, just breath, shallow and regular. Then she nodded, and the fires began. The first was lit in Smithfield. Morning fog still clung to the cobblestones when the stake was raised. Wet wood, iron chains, the air sharp with the smell of ash and wet wool. A man knelt John Rogers, his hands bound, lips moving in prayer. A crowd gathered, silent, pressed shoulder to shoulder. A woman in the back began to weep. Mary watched from a distance. She had not come in person, but her presence was there, etched into every flame, breathed into every spark. Her orders were law, her silence, permission. The fire caught quickly. Rogers didn't scream, not at first. But when the flames reached his belly, he howled. The sound hit the crowd like a stone through glass. Some turned away, others knelt. A few watched, unmoving, as if trying to decide whether this was justice or murder. Mary prayed through the entire execution. Her chaplain later wrote, "She seemed at peace afterward, lightened, unburdened." But something had shifted. The queen no longer smiled in court. Her eyes grew shadowed, ringed with red. She ate little, spoke only in short commands. Her fingers, once adorned with rubies, now bore only her wedding ring and a wooden cross. The executions continued. Oxford, Canterbury, Lewis, 300 names, 300 deaths. Each fire was a sermon, each scream, a confession. She believed this was her mission, her burden, her crucifixion. If England bled, it was only because it needed cleansing. When bishops begged for mercy, she stared through them. When foreign diplomats expressed alarm, she folded her hands and spoke in Latin, "Let the blood of the heretics be upon their own heads." She stopped attending feasts. Music was banned from the chapel. The tapestries in her private chamber were replaced with images of saints in agony. One night, she dreamed of her mother Catherine cloaked in fire, eyes glowing, whispering, "Burn them all, child, or burn yourself." She awoke screaming. The next day, she ordered the execution of women, mothers, daughters, sisters. A 16-year-old girl was burned in Colchester, her crime reading the Bible in English. Mary did not flinch. She believed the fires were doing what her womb could not, bringing rebirth. She had failed to bear a child of flesh, so she would bear a child of faith, one formed in flame, not blood, one that could not die. And yet, each new death twisted something in her, not regret, not guilt, something deeper, like a rope pulled too tight around the neck of the soul. Her face thinned, her voice frayed. She wept during communion, sometimes for hours. But she never stopped the burnings. Even Philip wrote from Spain. Perhaps the queen should show mercy. She did not answer. Instead, She visited the tower. She stood atop the battlements and looked down at the city, its steeples, its smoke, its silence. She saw a people cowering beneath her and thought, this is what obedience looks like. Below her, prisoners whispered prayers into stone. Some carved psalms with broken nails into the walls. Others went mad in the dark. Mary began to speak of angels, of signs. She believed God sent her visions, birds landing on windowsills, candles flickering in rhythm. Once, a rose bloomed in the frost. She took it as proof that she was right. That pain was sacred. The court began to murmur, but none dared confront her. Even Elizabeth, her half-sister, kept quiet. She bowed, she smiled, she survived. Only once did someone challenge the queen to her face, a Spanish friar, old and soft-spoken. "You mistake fire for light," he said. Mary banished him the next morning. Still, she felt it. Something turning. Not in the people, not in the court, in herself. Her hands began to shake when she signed orders. Her legs stiffened, her back ached. She walked more slowly, slept less, and her dreams grew darker. She heard voices in the fire now screaming. Yes, but also calling her name. Mary. Sometimes she would sit in front of the hearth for hours, just staring, unblinking, as if waiting for something to step out from the flame and take her hand. And each morning, the list grew longer. The silence returned first. Not a silence of peace, a silence that suffocates, a silence that knows. Mary Tudor lay motionless in her bed at St. James's Palace, her hands pressed gently over her midsection. Her belly had begun to swell again, slowly, painfully, like something growing with a will of its own. Her ladies-in-waiting moved through the chamber like ghosts, whispering, glancing, but never asking. No one dared speak the word pregnancy, because they had seen this before. She insisted it was real. She looked them in the eye with a fevered light and said, "There is life in me." Her voice did not shake. Her certainty did. The swelling felt different this time. Uneven. Her breath grew short. Her appetite disappeared. She could no longer walk without leaning on someone's arm. But she smiled, a strange, flickering smile, the kind born of desperation dressed as faith. She ordered the chapel prepared again. More candles, more masses. She fasted. She prayed. And when the pain came tight and low and throbbing, she whispered to her confessor, "He stirs. He's waking." Philip did not return. He sent letters. They were brief, politic, lacking warmth. She clutched them to her chest like relics. She read them at night under candlelight, lips trembling, eyes wide, as though willing his presence to appear between the lines. She waited. Each day, the swelling grew, and with it, the fear. The court held its breath. Again, the same midwives returned, the same doctors, but no celebration this time. The queen walked the halls like a figure carved in wax. Her steps were slow, uneven, her back curved, her face pale as old parchment, and still she whispered names to herself in Latin names for a child she believed was waiting. But it never moved. Her physician examined her, hands trembling, and found only distension, pain, a firmness too still. He told her it might be something else. She dismissed him. He left without bowing. And then came the blood. It started small, a single dark blot on her underclothes, but it didn't stop. She said nothing at first, simply washed the linen herself and told no one. But soon it became undeniable. She called for her ladies, ordered the sheets burned, sat upright in her chair, back stiff, eyes blank. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply said, "God gives and God takes. Perhaps I haven't bled enough." From that day on, she stopped speaking in court, refused to be seen, refused food, refused warmth. Her body trembled under layers of cloth. But she claimed she felt nothing. No cold, no pain, no fear. But her eyes said otherwise. She began accusing people quietly. At first, the cook had poisoned her meat. The laundress whispered spells into her sheets. A priest had failed to bless her wine. Each was dismissed. She stopped trusting mirrors, refused to be dressed by handmaids, said God had blinded her to vanity. But in truth, she could no longer bear the reflection, the bruised skin, the deepening yellow of her eyes, the curve of her abdomen slowly disappearing into emptiness. The night terrors began again. Screams echoing from behind the door, the sound of her own voice crying out names of children never born, her sheets soaked in sweat, her breath heaving, rasping, caught between prayer and madness. Some nights, she would crawl to the chapel barefoot, kneeling on cold stone until her knees bled. She begged the saints for mercy, begged for her mother, begged for something, anything to grow inside her that wasn't just sorrow. She stopped wearing shoes, stopped brushing her hair. Her nails turned gray, her lips cracked. One morning, she called for no one. Her ladies found her curled on the floor, whispering, "If no child will come from me, let the fire be my child." They said nothing. They helped her back to her chair. She ordered the windows shut, the chapel sealed, the physicians barred. And then she began writing again. Lists, names, orders. Not for baptism, but for judgment. She no longer trusted her womb, her hands, her breath, not even her reflection. Only the lists remained. Only the fire still answered. And what her body could no longer carry, she would pass to the flame. The fire had not saved her. It had only hollowed her further. Mary refused to leave her chamber. The bed, once a canopy of crimson velvet, now sagged under her weight, soaked with dark stains and the slow leakage of decay. She did not lie down anymore, not fully. Instead, she perched, tilted, contorted by unseen pain, like her body no longer remembered how to rest. Her breath came shallow, her belly swelled again, grotesquely, as if mocking the empty cradle she once prayed for. But there would be no birth, only pressure, only bloating. Her skin pulled tight across her abdomen, and the physicians whispered amongst themselves of tumors, of something growing without life. Each step she took when she could still stand sent liquid pain up her spine. Her legs trembled beneath her, blue at the knees, blackened at the toes, gangrene. They feared, though no one dared speak the word aloud. Instead, they brought oils, cloths, holy water, the ritual of denial. She stopped eating. The food, she claimed, smelled of sulfur, of betrayal, of ash. She demanded everything be tasted first by others, by animals, by the priest himself. And when they refused, she spat on the floor and turned away, laughing low to herself. The laughter did not stop. It turned to whispers, then to weeping. At night, she talked to no one. And yet, voices answered. They came from behind the tapestries, from beneath the stone tiles, from the mirror that now remained veiled, covered in a sheet she ordered nailed into the wall. "He's there," she whispered once to her maid, pointing to the covered glass. "Watching. Waiting." She spoke to shadows with a familiarity once reserved for saints. The air around her thickened, like the room itself exhaled its own fever. Candles burned down to puddles of wax. No one relit them. They were afraid. Her fingers, once adorned with rings, had thinned to bone. The nails yellowed, curled. One fell off in her sleep. Her ladies buried it in secret, too frightened to show her. When she awoke and found the finger exposed, she screamed, a sound that was no longer human, somewhere between a howl and a prayer. The lists continued, scratched in crooked ink, on every surface parchment, cloth, even skin. Names of enemies, names of those who doubted, names of those who had smiled too broadly in the presence of Elizabeth. One morning, she ordered a caged bird brought into her room, a dove. She held it in her hands, whispered to it, cried, then she snapped its neck. "She told me," Mary said softly. "It was her or me." She kept the bird beside her bed for days, until it too began to rot. The stench from her chamber grew unbearable. Servants wept from it. Courtiers covered their faces. Some claimed they saw black liquid soaking through the bottom of the door, creeping into the hall like a living thing. Still, no one dared move her. She refused priests, refused her husband's letters, refused the doctor's final remedies, refused the light. She sat beneath the cross, eyes sunken, lips cracked, bleeding every morning anew. "She is unraveling," one chamberlain whispered. "No," said another. "She has already unraveled. What remains is not her." And yet, she remained, clutching her prayer book with hands that trembled. She recited not scripture, but numbers, names, commands. She believed if she repeated them enough, heaven would remember her. That blood, shed in the right order, could rewind fate. When she closed her eyes, she did not see angels. She saw fire and the faces of the condemned. By November, she could no longer walk. Her legs had stiffened, swollen with fluid that turned her skin dark and glistening. Each joint resisted like rusted iron. Servants lifted her by the arms, wincing at the smell that clung to her flesh. When they touched her, something peeled skin, or bandage, or something between the two. She did not react. Mary no longer wept. She no longer prayed aloud. She only stared. Her eyes had receded deep into their sockets. The whites clouded like old glass. Her lips had cracked and bled so often that scabs formed a map across her mouth. Her breath rattled wetly. Her chest rose and fell with labor. Not rhythm. They brought her food, untouched. She sat in her high-backed chair, bolstered by pillows, layered in wool and velvet, though she always shivered. The chamber, once filled with scent and candlelight, now reeked of sickbed and smoke. Curtains drawn, fire always burning. The warmth did nothing for her. Her ladies came and went in silence, like mourners at a wake. Some held cloths to their faces. Others wore gloves. No one met her eyes. They couldn't. What looked back at them no longer resembled a queen, or even a woman. Her flesh had begun to split. Beneath the robes, the skin along her spine and thighs blistered and burst, leaking fluid so foul it forced them to burn the linens each morning. The mattress beneath her grew black in places. Her feet swelled and darkened, toes fusing together in stiffness. The physicians stopped pretending. They offered opiates. She refused them. "She wants the pain." One whispered, "She thinks it's holy." And perhaps it was. For in those final days, Mary said very little, but when she did, her words chilled the room. "God is still watching me," she rasped once. "I have not bled enough." She begged for Mass to be said hourly. Even through the night, she could no longer kneel. So they placed relics in her lap, splinters of the true cross, strands of saintly hair. She clutched them so tightly her knuckles split. One night, she reached for the candle beside her and whispered, "I am the wick now." The palace stilled. No visitors came, only the sound of bells, muffled footsteps, and the breathing, always the breathing. Ragged, wet, uneven, sometimes slow, sometimes gasping, as if she was falling and had forgotten how to land. Her mind had dissolved into fragments. Names she once knew now floated past her, just beyond reach. She confused the dead for the living, thought her mother was at the foot of her bed, called for Philip in her sleep, only to wake with a wheeze and a cough that shook her whole body. The end did not come quickly. It arrived inch by inch. The color drained from her face. Her lips turned blue, her eyes rolled back, then forward, then stared again. Her hands curled into claws against the covers, and she began to mutter in Latin, over and over, a single phrase. "Libera me, Domine. Deliver me, O Lord." On the morning of November 17th, 1558, she did not speak. She did not move. Her breath shallowed to silence. And then, at last, her chest stopped. No one cheered. No one wept aloud. They simply looked at one another numb, relieved, afraid, when they lifted her body. Something tore beneath the silk. The stench forced 2 servants to leave the room. The others unwrapped her slowly, carefully, trying not to gag. Her abdomen had ruptured. Her inner organs had liquefied in place. Her body had begun to decompose days before death. The sheets were burned. The mattress was destroyed. They opened every window, but the smell lingered. She was buried weeks later. In Westminster Abbey. No children behind her. No husband beside her. No anthem strong enough to erase what she had done. Above her tomb, the candlelight flickered, and England turned to another name. The Abbey was cold. Stone pressed up against stone. Incense hung heavy in the air. The choir sang in Latin, but the words felt hollow, like echoes through a crypt already long abandoned. Her coffin, closed quickly, sealed tightly, rested beneath flickering candlelight. No weeping, no mourning veil wet with tears, only ceremony. A queen laid to rest without an heir, without a future, without forgiveness. Outside, the wind turned. Autumn folded into winter. London moved on. And down in the vault, beneath earth and altar, she remained. Years later, they buried Elizabeth beside her sister. To sister, rival to rival. One had ruled in blood, one in spectacle. And yet, in the end, their bones touched. No monuments for fire, no crown for ash, only silence. In the darkest corner of the chapel, a candle still burns. No one remembers who lit it. No one dares put it out. Because some names don't die. They ferment, they whisper, and in the hush between prayers, when the bells go still, you can almost hear her breathing. Still there, still waiting, still burning.